Bill Maher called out CNN's Caitlyn Collins on the network's bias. Let's watch.
And I don't blame them. They were just gushing about how great a speech it was. And I think she did fine. I didn't think it was as good as they were making it out to be. It does look like tokenism. It's kind of like the same as The View. You made press because you were on Stephen Colbert's show, and he said something like, you guys at CNN just report the news straight. And the crowd burst into laughter. In a way, I feel like it's more insulting than what Trump does. And Trump says you're the enemy of the people, which is pretty bad. But she's kind of saying I don't need you. I'm not talking to you. You don't matter. You're not relevant anymore. To me, that's even worse than I hate you. It's like, I don't think about you.
I don't know if it's worse than denigrating the press on a daily basis, which is what Donald Trump... CNN is the place where both sides can watch. And
I'm talking about the people on CNN. And what I know what the conservative side of America thinks.
Have you ever wondered what happens when a high-profile liberal icon suddenly calls out one of the most prominent left-leaning news networks in America? That's exactly what went down recently when political commentator and comedian Bill Maher turned his spotlight on CNN, specifically targeting rising anchor Caitlyn Collins for what he claimed was blatant bias and narrative manipulation. For a man who voted for President Biden and rarely shies away from criticizing conservative politics, Maher's harsh words towards CNN are sending shockwaves through the media landscape. Even more surprising, he's not alone in saying that CNN might be more interested in controlling the conversation than reporting the facts.
when you knew the federal government was seeking them and then had given you a subpoena to return them.
Are you ready? Are you ready? Can I talk?
Yeah, what's the
mind?
answer?
Do you mind?
I would like for you to answer the question.
Okay, it's very simple to answer.
That's why I asked it.
It's very simple to, you're a nasty person, I'll tell you.
In a moment that left television audiences speechless, Maher sat down and openly questioned whether CNN had lost its claim to neutrality. When an entire studio audience of Stephen Colbert's late-night show started laughing at the mere suggestion that CNN just reports the news straight, it was a signal that people from all sides of the political divide are raising eyebrows. And guess who was in the hot seat? None other than Caitlyn Collins, a rising star at CNN and the face behind several confrontational interviews, especially involving Donald Trump.
Can you say if you want Ukraine or Russia to win this war?
I want everybody to stop dying. They're dying. Russians and Ukrainians. I want them to stop dying.
Money and weapons if you're elected. What's the answer?
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours. It'll be absolutely
Do you
over.
want Ukraine to win this war?
I don't think in terms of winning and losing. I think in terms of getting it settled so we stop killing all these people.
Can I just follow up on that because that's a really important statement
let me just
that you
follow
made
up.
there.
But this story isn't just about one incident on late-night TV. It's about a bigger question. Has one of the most famous news organizations in the world prioritized advancing particular viewpoints over giving viewers a balanced perspective? Bill Maher thinks so, and he pulled zero punches, laying it all out. If you think this is just another media spat, buckle up. We're going to break down exactly why Maher singled out Collins, how other media figures like Megyn Kelly and Ben Shapiro piled on, and what it all means for the future of network news in America.
Appropriate to bury the Hunter Biden.
You're talking about the press doing that?
He's saying that's what they did, and that is what they did. They buried the Hunter Biden story before the election because they were like, we can't risk having the election thrown to Trump. We'll tell them after the election.
And we know for a fact that that's what they did?
Of course. You don't
but
follow
I'm
this.
saying you know for a fact that that's what they did. I don't know what they did.
I know, because you only watch MSNBC.
No, that's not true.
It may sound ironic that a man long identified with liberal politics is leading the charge against a network many view as leaning left. Bill Maher has built his brand on being a free-thinking liberal, often mocking Republicans while championing progressive causes like marriage equality or climate change. He's no stranger to controversy. Yet, in recent years, Maher has gained a reputation for calling out what he terms woke overreach. He argues that certain media outlets, even those on the left, have twisted their coverage to the point where they're pushing activism instead of news. So, how did he wind up firing shots at CNN? It's partly because Maher, despite his liberal credentials, hasn't hesitated to criticize his own side whenever he thinks they've gone too far. He insists that media organizations should strive for genuine neutrality and accept a diversity of opinions. Lately, he's felt that CNN departed from that principle, transforming itself into a channel that, in his view, tries to steer the national conversation in a particular direction. Even those who disagree with Maher politically tend to acknowledge that he's rarely afraid to take unpopular stances. When he started pointing fingers at Caitlyn Collins for her approach to interviewing conservatives, especially Donald Trump, folks paid attention. Was he defending Trump's policies? Not necessarily. Instead, he was challenging the notion that CNN approached interviews like these fairly. Maher's pointed claim, CNN has become so entrenched in opposing Trump that they've lost the broader mission of straight reporting. What's truly interesting is that Maher's audience typically skews left. For them, hearing him slam a network that they might have trusted for years can be disorienting. But it's not the first time he's done so. He's previously criticized liberal media for self-sabotage, suggesting that by so obviously taking sides, networks like CNN have inadvertently handed Trump a potent argument, namely that the press isn't after truth, but after him.
Because you were on Stephen Colbert's show, and he said something like, you guys at CNN just report the news straight. And the crowd burst into laughter. Look, I'm on CNN now. I guess we're on it right now. I mean, they showed this show the next night. I don't know how we get away with it with all the fucks, but they do. And all these dirty jokes. But I'm glad, and I'm a big rooter for CNN. But that tells you a lot, doesn't it? I mean, how do you guys think you are doing in that arena of like, this is a terribly divided country. We're not only politicized, a lot of people just hate the other side. And CNN, in my view, should be the place where both sides can watch. How do you think you're doing with that?
How is CNN is the place where both sides can watch. And I think, my show is evidence of that. We have lawmakers on from both parties. We'll have Elizabeth Warren on one night. We'll have Ted Cruz on.
If you want to see just how precarious CNN's reputation is, look no further than that moment on Stephen Colbert's show. Maher appeared as a guest, and they casually drifted into discussing the media landscape. Colbert, a comedian known for left-leaning humor, innocently, or maybe not so innocently, remarked that CNN just reports the news. You'd think a left-leaning late-night audience might applaud, or at least nod along. Instead, the crowd burst into laughter. In that instant, you could almost feel the shift. It wasn't forced laughter, nor was it a small minority tittering. Awkwardly. It was an immediate, unified reaction. The message was clear. A significant segment of left-leaning viewers doesn't exactly see CNN as a shining beacon of neutrality. Maher seized upon that reaction, pointing out that it spoke volumes about how the country perceives the network. The bigger question is, why would an audience that presumably isn't fond of Trump or conservative politics find that statement so funny? After all, many in that crowd likely watch CNN, but we're living in a time when people on both sides of the aisle feel the major news networks spin events to fit pre-existing narratives. Even self-proclaimed liberals sometimes grimace at CNN's coverage, saying it feels more like political commentary than unbiased reporting. Maher's point was that you can't keep insisting you're impartial when the public clearly sees a pattern of pointed coverage, especially around hot-button topics like the Trump presidency, his legal troubles, and controversies involving Hunter Biden. The laughter on Colbert's set was a cultural thermometer. If even a left-leaning crowd scoffs at the idea that CNN is neutral, then the network might be facing a bigger trust crisis than they realize. To understand how Caitlyn Collins wound up in Bill Maher's crosshairs, you have to look at her high-profile interviews, especially with Donald Trump. Collins has a knack for peppering her questions with commentary, creating a combative atmosphere. That energizes some viewers, but leaves others feeling like they're watching a political sparring match rather than a journalistic interview. One of the flashpoints involved her repeated attempts to corner Trump on foreign policy, particularly regarding Russia and Ukraine. She demanded to know if he wanted Ukraine to win, seemingly fishing for a quote that might get him labeled as sympathetic to Russia. Maher argued this was a classic CNN tactic, orchestrating questions with no good answer, effectively turning interviews into traps. When Trump didn't give a clear, Russia must lose statement, Collins pounced, implying that he was dodging support for Ukraine. From Maher's perspective, it wasn't a fair question designed to elicit policy insight, it was a rhetorical pitfall intended to produce a damning soundbite. Trump, well practiced at these verbal maneuvers, avoided giving her the quote she wanted. insisting that he wanted no more lives lost, Ukrainian or Russian. Collins persisted, zeroing in on the possibility that Trump was indifferent to Ukraine's plight. Trump doubled down on the notion of stopping the war quickly. Maher's critique isn't that journalists shouldn't ask tough questions, but that CNN too often frames questions as gotchas, focusing more on generating headlines than facilitating real discourse. And in these back and forths, viewers can sense the tension. Is it about information, or is it about delivering a knockout punch? Before the 2020 election, one story simmered just below the surface: Hunter Biden's laptop. Claims of potentially incriminating material, emails, photos, and possible connections to foreign money floated around conservative circles and online outlets. Mainstream networks, however, largely avoided it, waving it off as some combination of rumor, Russian disinformation, or simply unverified chatter. According to Bill Maher, that wasn't journalism. It was willful suppression. Maher contended that CNN and other networks wanted to protect Joe Biden's chances, reasoning that any damaging story about Hunter Biden might derail Biden's campaign. The strategy? Bury the story until after the election. In Maher's view, if that's true, it amounts to blatant manipulation of public opinion. Caitlyn Collins, who was part of CNN's political coverage at the time, presumably took cues from the network's overall stance. Even if she didn't personally quash the story, she operated in an environment where the story wasn't receiving serious coverage. For Maher, the media's double standard is glaring. If a Trump family member had faced even a fraction of the allegations hovering around Hunter Biden, CNN would have run wall-to-wall coverage. Yet with Hunter, controversies and possible evidence of corruption were downplayed. Maher didn't mince words, essentially saying that such selective coverage confirms the suspicion that mainstream news organizations act more like political allies than neutral observers. This stance has garnered Maher an unexpected alliance among some conservative audiences. They see him as a liberal who finally acknowledges media partiality they've complained about for years. By poking holes in CNN's editorial decisions, especially around the Hunter Biden scandal, Maher inadvertently validated many conservatives' claims that the network plays defense for Democrats while attacking Republicans nonstop. Maher isn't the only one shaking his head at CNN. Megyn Kelly, once a leading figure at Fox News before carving out her own path, has blasted Caitlyn Collins for being both biased and, as she puts it, painfully dull. According to Kelly, Collins isn't just predisposed to a specific narrative, she also fails to connect with viewers by rarely displaying genuine warmth or personality. Kelly's critique touches on something more profound. For an anchor entrusted with primetime interviews and big political moments, Collins often appears icy or combative. While some fans appreciate her tough approach, others say it alienates viewers who want more than a combative stare-down. Kelly even offered a piece of unsolicited advice: try smiling every once in a while. The notion may sound superficial, but in the cutthroat world of television news, personal warmth can matter just as much as professional rigor. Then there's Ben Shapiro, the conservative commentator who's never shy about calling out mainstream media. He pointed to the same Stephen Colbert clip, saying the reaction from that left-leaning crowd indicates a national fatigue with CNN's perpetual posture of, "We're neutral, everyone else is biased." Shapiro's take is that even liberals have grown tired of a network that claims it's objective, while consistently slanting stories and ignoring inconvenient details about favored politicians. What's intriguing is the convergence. Figures like Maher, Kelly, and Shapiro don't often agree on much, yet they're all echoing the same sentiment about CNN, namely that the network pursues narratives at the expense of solid journalism. Maher, a disillusioned liberal, Kelly, a former Fox News star, and Shapiro, a prominent conservative voice, stand on starkly different ends of the political spectrum. The fact that all three see the same problems with CNN suggests that the network's woes aren't just partisan gripes. Caitlyn Collins doesn't limit her scrutiny to Trump. She's also gone after people in his circle, including Caroline Leavitt. Leavitt served as a press secretary under the Trump administration and was known for pushing back on what she called CNN's performative outrage. One particularly tense moment revolved around press access to the Oval Office. Collins questioned why certain reporters, notably from outlets critical of the administration, weren't invited into key press opportunities. Leavitt shot back that press access is not a constitutional right, emphasizing that it's the administration's prerogative to control how, when, and where the president answers questions. She argued that CNN historically had ample opportunities to grill Trump, yet repeatedly used those moments for spectacle rather than information gathering.
Which White House official made the decision to bar the AP reporter from the Oval Office and the diplomatic reception room last night?
Well, first of all, let me just set the record straight. It is a privilege to cover this White House. It's a privilege to be the White House press secretary. And nobody has the right to go into the Oval Office and ask the President of the United States questions. That's an invitation that is given. And there are hundreds of outlets on this campus, many of you in this room who don't have the privilege of being part of that pool every single day and getting to ask the president questions. We reserve the right to decide who gets to go into the Oval Office, and you all have credentials to be here, including the Associated Press, who is in this briefing room today.
But isn't it retaliatory in nature is the argument, because there's a reason that the AP was barred, which they said was because they're not using the phrase Gulf of America, they're using Gulf of Mexico in line with their standards. And so the question here is this setting a precedent that this White House will retaliate against reporters who don't use the language that you guys believe reporters should use? And how does that...
This tactic, accusing CNN of staging gotchas instead of legitimate policy discussions, mirrors Bill Maher's broader critique. If you're only looking for a viral moment, you're not really doing journalism. What makes the situation even more ironic is that certain Biden-era policies have also been restrictive toward the press, with minimal outcry from networks like CNN. That leads critics to cry foul. If you slam Trump's White House for limiting press access but give Biden's team a pass, how can you claim to be unbiased? And remember Karine Jean-Pierre, the former White House press secretary under President Biden? She once stood at the podium defending various press limitations, yet she also criticized Leavitt for the Trump administration's press policies. Leavitt, in turn, called out Jean-Pierre's hypocrisy. The entire saga epitomizes the double-standard theme. Media personalities and political figures conveniently shift stances on press freedom depending on which party holds the White House. Maher sees it as further proof that networks like CNN aren't after truth, they're after control. So how is all this received by the everyday viewer at home who might just want straightforward news without feeling manipulated? Poll after poll indicates a disturbing trend. Trust in mainstream media is plummeting. People on both sides of the political spectrum increasingly believe that journalists have become activists in disguise, selectively highlighting or burying stories to suit political goals. This erosion of trust didn't happen overnight. It's been building for years. But events like the burying of the Hunter Biden story, relentless coverage of any Trump misstep, and the visible hostility in interviews have accelerated the decline. Maher argues that the media's obsession with controlling the narrative is precisely what makes alternative outlets and independent commentators so attractive to viewers hungry for unfiltered discussion. Caitlyn Collins, as a high-profile CNN figure, ends up bearing the brunt of the blame, even if she's not solely responsible. She's positioned as the face of CNN's combative style. And when Bill Maher calls her out, others quickly join the chorus. Whether it's Megyn Kelly calling her boring, Ben Shapiro highlighting her interviews as examples of bias, or left-leaning audience members laughing at the idea of CNN's neutrality, the sentiment is undeniable. CNN's brand of both sides. Can watch is no longer resonating. That's a huge problem. Once viewers sense a network is less about reporting and more about persuading, the network risks losing them for good. It also explains the dramatic ratings drop some cable channels have experienced in recent years. People feel done with the 24/7 outrage machine. They want substance, not theatrics, and in their eyes, CNN, represented by Collins, is failing to deliver. In the end, Bill Maher's showdown with Caitlyn Collins at CNN is about much more than one controversial interview or a few pointed remarks on late-night TV. It's a snapshot of a deeper media crisis, one in which networks that once prided themselves on neutrality are now openly questioned, even by those who share their general political leanings. When an audience that presumably leans left cracks up at the mere idea that CNN is unbiased, that's a huge red flag for the network and the entire industry. Maher's criticisms align with those of media figures as varied as Megyn Kelly and Ben Shapiro, suggesting that frustration with CNN transcends traditional left-right boundaries. The controversies over Hunter Biden's laptop, gotcha-style questions aimed at conservatives, and selective outrage about press access have all piled up into a mountain of skepticism. And Caitlyn Collins, who was heralded as a rising star at CNN, finds herself at the center of it all. For Collins, no amount of "I'm from a conservative family" lines will override the mounting evidence that CNN has become more of a narrative curator than a neutral news outlet. The same goes for the network as a whole. At some point, public trust, once lost, is nearly impossible to win back. Maher's simple advice to CNN was to stop digging the hole deeper. If they keep doubling down on the same strategies, aggressive interviews that yield predictable brawls, selective coverage of political scandals, and a refusal to acknowledge obvious biases, they might find themselves losing the very viewers they claim to serve. So where does that leave us? For now, Bill Maher remains the unexpected ally of critics who say CNN has turned into little more than a mouthpiece for the Democratic establishment. Caitlyn Collins, for her part, claims she's simply doing her job, pressing politicians for real answers. But until CNN addresses the broader perception that they're cooking the narrative instead of just covering it, the skepticism will only grow. Thank you for sticking with us through this deep dive into the Maher-CNN controversy. If you found yourself nodding along, or if you have a different perspective entirely, we encourage you to reflect on how media coverage shapes your views. After all, skepticism isn't inherently a bad thing. It's often the catalyst for seeking out more balanced information. Give this video a like if you appreciated the frank analysis, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that dig below the headlines. We'll see you in the next one.